Training 2 of your Xoro 1 or Xoro ERP system. We're going to cover in this training session largely sales orders, going through the fulfillment process, how to waive, what a waive is, taking advance payments, so customer deposits, handling returns, and some reports as well. So let's get started here. I've got the system logged in already. So I'm going to go to the sales order module, and I'm going to create a brand new sales order. Now, there's many different ways that you can actually create sales orders in the system. You can upload them using a CSV uploader. Obviously, if you have third-party connections, the orders can be created automatically. Keying the order in manually is also another way to do it, so that's how we're going to do it today. So first thing I'm going to do is select a customer here. So what I can actually do is just go down this drop-down list, and I can select a customer. A couple things are going to happen. So for example, I've got this customer selected here. Sales rep automatically gets populated. Also, the billing and shipping addresses automatically get populated. Now, the sales store and ship store here basically determine what store or what warehouse this order is associated with. So for example, I've got a warehouse in LA and one in Vancouver. So the sales store in this case is LA. So eventually, once an invoice is generated out of the sales order, that invoice is going to be associated to the LA warehouse. That's what the sales store represents. Now, the ship store represents basically what warehouse you're fulfilling those items from. So it could be that you want to associate the sale to the LA warehouse, but you want to ship it out of Vancouver, or vice versa. Now, in most cases, especially for apparel situations and things like that, a lot of times these two are going to be the same. So you might see that happen quite often. So now what you can do from here is basically you can fill in a reference number. I'll put in a reference number here. I can put in a customer PO number, and so on. So I can annotate the order date, ship date, cancel date. Let's do that as well. There we go. Now let's go ahead, let's add some items to my order. So I can use the variant finder. So if I've got my items set up like a style and product, basically what I can do is I can use the variant finder, the matrix finder. And essentially what that's going to do is if I click on this, I can pull up a style. And then from here, I can actually go across the matrix, basically across my whole row here, and I can tab through my columns and put in the units that I want to add to this order. Press enter at the end here, and then click on add to order. You can see now all those units got added to the order. Now, if I wanted to add items individually, one by one, variant by variant, I can use the add item button here as well. So that'll let you add items one by one. Otherwise, you can use the variant finder. It's just a quicker way to add items if you have them created by style. So let's go ahead, let's save our order. There we go. We've got our order saved, and as you can see, there are the totals at the bottom here, including quantities, the total. Now, in this case, my instance is actually a Canadian instance. So what it's doing is it's detecting USD as a foreign currency, and it's converting everything back to the home currency using this exchange rate. And again, this exchange rate fetches automatically the daily updated rate for USD. So in this case, what it's doing is it's doing 240 times 1.31 to give me 314.4. I can change this. I can always edit this rate to whatever I want, and then hit save, and it'll update the total here at the bottom. All right, now adding these items, once I've got the items added, I can do quite a few things. I can edit the descriptions, the unit prices. I can add discounts. So for example, I can add a 5% discount to this line. I can edit the quantities once it's been added. And I can do a lot of this stuff in batch. So for example, I can select a whole bunch of items, and I can go batch discount. That's basically adding a discount to the whole order. I can do something like that. See, it's going to be 10% discounted. I can apply any custom pricing. So if I want to apply any particular type of pricing, I can do that here as well if I've got those set up. I can change the ship dates on each of these lines in case some of the lines are getting shipped out on different dates, I have that option available as well. So here we go. We've got our order. Let's go to the shipping tab and let's talk a little bit about how you can annotate shipping. So if you want to add shipping to your sales order, your customer sales order, you do it from this tab right here. So there's actually three methods for shipment. There's pickup. So if your customer is actually coming to you and physically picking up the goods, this is what you'd select. If you notice, once you select this, it's going to gray out all the other fields. There's own truck. So basically, if you select own truck, this is in the case where you have your own delivery truck, your own company truck that you use to ship out the goods to your customers. So you can use this option in that case and then put in a shipping here. You can select third party if you're using, like a FedEx or UPS or Purelator, Canada Post, something like that. So if you're using a third party carrier, you can want to select third party here, and you can annotate the carriers, the ship services, put in a shipping cost here. Now there's a couple ways that the shipping cost is handled. So if you select prepaid and billed here, that's essentially you're passing the shipping cost on to the customer, in which case there'll be a line here for shipping and it'll get totaled up at the bottom here. Now, let's say the customer has their own carrier account that they want to charge to. In that case, you can do third-party billing and enter the carrier account here. And in that case, the shipping won't be added to the total of the order. Notice here how there's no line, the $15 line for shipping. So you can see here that these are usually the two most common methods for shipping terms, prepaid and billed, if you want to actually charge your customer for shipping, and third-party billing if you want to charge it to their carrier account. The rest are not as often used, but of course you're free to use. So in this case, let's do prepaid and billed. We'll add our shipping to the order. And of course, you can see there's a couple of fields here like memo and exchange rate. I can edit these addresses at any point as well. Like I can click on the pencil. I can make changes manually. And these are controlled by the customer master. So whatever the default customer shipping and bill to addresses are, those are the ones that are fetched automatically. Okay. And of course, if you go to, there's a whole bunch of other fields here as well. Shipping notes, third-party account number. If you go to the other tab, you can add tags, you can add the order type. You can also add advance payment. So if you require an advance payment on this order, you can actually say that, okay, well, I require 25% advance payment on this order. So it's going to do 25% of this total here. And we'll get to exactly what that means in just a sec. The history, basically, this tab is great if you want to see all the transactions that stemmed from the sales order. So eventually, the sales order is going to get a waive on it. It may get a prepayment in the form of a deposit. It'll get an invoice once it's shipped. It may get a credit on it if some items were returned. So all those transactions you can see in the history tab. So instead of going to each module and finding it, you can simply open up an order, go to the history tab, and you can see all the different transactions that were associated with this order. So let's go ahead, let's save our order. There we go, it's been updated. And of course, you can go to the Sales Order Center and you can find the order that we just created. So right here's our order here, the LA order that we created. You can always pull it up from the Sales Order Center. I can always right click on the order, edit a new window. Right, now from here, there's a couple things I want to mention. Let's just click on print. I'll show you what the printout looks like. So there might be, depending on your instance, you might have several different templates for sales orders, depending which ones are enabled to you. So let's take a look at the apparel template and just see what it looks like. So your printout, your sales order printout is probably going to look something similar to this. So this is basically the printout that when you email the order out, this will get attached with the email. You can always export this into PDF format or Excel, print this off, and you can see here it's got all the information that the order has, your totals, your discounts, the line level information as well. All right. So if you need anything changed, just be sure to let your account manager know, and they'll be able to make the tweaks on the printouts for you. Now, clicking on this option menu, there'll be a couple things I want to mention. You can void this order, which we actually don't recommend just because voiding an order will completely delete the order permanently from the system, and you won't be able to recover it in any way. In fact, even we won't be able to recover it. So you want to be very careful when deleting an order, when voiding an order. You only want to do it basically if you've been testing an order out or something like that. But if an order gets canceled or it's complete, you want to cancel or close it. So that leaves the order in the system, so you can always refer to it. It's probably the recommended way to go, especially if an order is like partially shipped, but the customer maybe mentioned to you that, okay, I don't need the last 5 units. You can close out the order, in which case you can just simply close the sales order. Canceling is pretty self-explanatory. If the customer comes to you and says, hey, we're not going to go through this order anymore, you can simply cancel it. A couple things I want to mention here is if you click on copy, you can do a couple neat things with this order. You can create a duplicate of it. So this number here, so you notice when we save the order, the number auto-generated at the top here. So this is a system-generated number that automatically gets created. You can, of course, enter in any reference number or customer PO of your liking, but the status and the order number here at the top get created automatically. So if you were to create a duplicate of this order, it's going to create the exact same order. The only difference is this number is going to be different. It's just going to be the next number in the system. So creating duplicate, this is handy if you have a canceled or closed order or you have a repeated order. You can always just open that old order up, create a duplicate of it, and then carry on with the new order. Copy to purchase order. So what this will do is this will take these lines from this order and basically take them to a purchase order module. So if you needed to create a vendor PO for all these lines, you could do that with this feature here. So that's pretty handy if, for whatever reason you wanted to create immediately a vendor PO, you can do that. This is pretty much the same thing. It's just going to automatically look at the default vendor for these items and create a PO based on those default vendors. This last option here, it does the same thing, except it'll look at the selected lines and only copy those ones over to a PO. Now the move split feature, this one can be quite handy as well. You can basically take the selected lines and move them over to a new sales order. So that's essentially sales order splitting, right? So if you want to split these two lines off to a new order, you can do that. You can actually move these two lines off to an existing sales order with this option here, the second option. And this last option takes a look at unavailable lines. So if there were any, for example, let me actually add an unavailable. Let's see, I think this line might be unavailable. There we go. So that's actually what an unavailable line looks like. So you can see I've got no stock on this last line, and we'll talk in just in a sec what exactly this means here. But you can see here that I'm short, and it's letting me know. So in that case, if I were to move the unavailable lines, it would only move this last line here, regardless of what I have selected. All right, so those are some of the basic options. We'll go through a little bit more in just a moment. Let's talk about emailing. So if you wanted to email this order out to your customer, you can click on Add to Email Queue. And so what you can actually do is it's going to pop open this window here, and you can choose to email it to the respective recipient. And what that means is it's going to fetch the email, the main email address from this customer, from the customer file, and use that as the email to send it to. Now, if you want to specify another email to send it to, you can do that here. And so I can type in an email here. And you have two options now. And the template at the top here actually determines what PDF is attached when you actually send the email. So we actually opened up the apparel template. So I'm going to select that one. So that's the one that'll get attached when we email it to them. And from here, you can preview and send. So you can actually, if you want to send the email right now, you can do that. Or if you want to add it to the queue. So what that means is you can actually add emails to your queue, and then maybe once at the end of the day or maybe halfway through the day, you can basically send all your emails in your queue all at once. But if you prefer to send it right now, you can do that as well. So let's actually do that. So be sure to have your user email set up before you actually go through with this sending the email, because you will need that set up in order to actually send an email. So what that means is if you go to your user email setup, you'll want to make sure that this has been filled in and properly validated with all your email settings. So once this is filled in, you'll actually be able to use that email to send the orders out, because the system needs an email account to send out the orders. And so what will actually happen is once you send this email out, it'll actually appear in your sent box for that email address, so that when they reply to you, you can actually use your email client to engage in that conversation. So in this case, what we did is when we click preview and send, it opened this up. So you can see here in 2, it's got that info email that I typed in. It's got a PDF attachment of that apparel printout that we selected, and it's going to have a default body here that it's populated. Now, if you want to control what this default body looks like, so for example, if you want to add your own personal signature or anything like that, you have that ability. So what you can actually do is you can go to the email template module. And what you can do is select sales order and basically fill in here how you want the template to be. So if you want to add your own signature, you can drag and drop pictures in here. You can add placeholders as well. So these placeholders will dynamically pull in data from the order. So for example, if you wanted customer name, it's actually going to grab the customer name that's on that particular order. Right? You can see here, hi, customer name. And so in the case of our email, it actually fetched the customer name. So there's a lot of placeholders that you can select from, so you can get quite creative and set up the default email at least exactly how you want it to be, so that when you actually send that email, it'll fetch that body by default. So I can actually go in here, I can edit my email, and if everything looks good, I can hit send. Now, mine actually won't send because my user email is not set up, so it's actually going to give me an error. But once yours is set up, it'll actually successfully send the email. Let's close this. Let's do the other option now where we add it to the queue. So I'm going to go add to queue. And now my email has been added to the queue. So I can open the user email setup module, and I'll notice that, not user email setup, but email center. There we go. So I'll notice that my email's been added to the queue here. And so what I can do is I can just select all my emails. I can pull them all up actually. And if I want to send them all out at once, I can just simply hit send selected. Right, and so that's what it means to basically add them to your queue, and then here you can manually compose emails as well, and you can take a look at your sent box as well. So that's basically how you can email orders out to your customers. Let's talk a little bit about commenting. So I mentioned in the previous training how you can basically mention your colleagues, your peers, on specific orders or transactions. So on most of the transactions in the system, you're going to notice this chat icon on the top right. So if you click on this number next to the chat icon, it's going to pop open this comments box. And so here I can actually mention my colleagues, and I can say, hey, how's this order doing? Click on post, and now Brian's going to get a message. So once he logs in, or if he's already logged in, he'll see a notification on this top right, just like I see right here with this one. So he'll be able to click on it, see that I've messaged him, give a reply, open up this order, maybe follow up with the customer, and so on. So this is a great way to kind of make those comments, along with keeping less emails as possible. So if you live enough within the app, you can actually use this commenting ability with your peers. And you probably notice the attachment tab. So here you can actually drag and drop PDFs, pictures, document files, and things like that. So if you want to associate any of those files with this transaction, with this order, you're free to do that. And this ability, this chat ability, is available on all the modules in the system. Okay, so there we go. We've got our order here. Now, one thing of note, if you wanted to set up basically pricing rules, so for example, if you have some customers that you always give a 5% discount or a 10% discount, or if it's a seasonal discount, you maybe in the month of December you always do 10% to particular clients or something like that. We can set up those rules for you. Just let your account manager know, and we can set up those pricing rules for you. So the idea is that instead of you having to remember to always give that discount, um, we can set them up, and they can get quite advanced. So if it's a discount on a particular item for a particular customer, we can do that as well. All right, so let's go ahead. Now let's talk a little bit about the statuses of these orders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to release this order. And basically what that means is it simply means that this order has now been finalized. So at this stage, I've gone back and forth with the client, with the customer. I've confirmed the pricing with them, the quantities, the units, everything looks good. So what I'm going to do is release the order. And what that means simply is it doesn't mean that it's, being sent anywhere or anything like that. It just means that it's in preparation for shipment. And so you'll want to make sure that you release the order so you can actually allocate it. So once I've released this order, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a couple columns here. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go options, and I'm going to go create wave manual. So what a wave is, basically, it means that you're allocating the order. So waiving and allocating are synonymous terms. So when you allocate an order, basically what it means is you've created a wave on it. And so when you've allocated it, you've actually reserved that inventory for this order and made sure that nobody else can get a hand on that inventory. And so that way, when you actually ship the inventory out, by the time you actually ship it out, that inventory that you had reserved, it stays the same. It doesn't get stolen by another order or anything like that. So I'm going to click on this order here. Now, we're actually going to go through and manually waive this order, and I'll show you in a sec how you can actually speed up this process a bit. So the last item, you can see here how it's how it's actually short. So I can't even waive it actually. So this is one of the checks in the system that if your system doesn't have stock, doesn't have inventory, there's no way that you can actually ship it out. You'll need to have inventory in the system in order for you to actually waive it and ship it out, because it just doesn't make sense that you don't have inventory in the system, but yet you're somehow able to ship this out. How's that possible? So this is how it's showing that last item here. Now what I can do is I can actually pretty much select the lines that I want to allocate. So for example, let's say I want to ship these two lines and only these top two lines. So I'm going to send these over, select them, send them over to the right, click on Create Wave. And then I'm going to click on Confirm and Create Wave. Now, if you're self-fulfilling, you can actually specify a consolidation location, temporary housing location for the inventory, and confirm and create wave. There we go. And then click OK. So now I'm going to click Save. And actually, even before I do that, notice how this quantity allocated has now been populated, because these two units, these two lines have been allocated now. So what I can actually do now is the next step for me is the warehousing team can actually print the wave. And the wave is essentially also a pick ticket. So I can go to the pick wave module, and I can see here the wave that's been created. So I can print it off. And again, this is the default pick ticket that's used by the system. If you need anything tweaked, you can let your account manager know. And here you can actually print this sheet off. And so your picking team will actually go in the warehouse. And, if you've got a full-fledged warehouse, they'll actually go to the location where this item's stored. And they'll pick these units off the shelf. And they'll enter in this sheet how many units they picked. Right? So for example here, we've got these two these two lines that we want to pick. So I'm going to close this. And now what I can do is I can fill in the quantity that I wanted to pick. Now the easiest way I think to do this is to simply hit fulfill wave, and it's going to populate this quantity pick column with the maximum quantities. There we go. See how that quantity picked is now updated. Now, if I wanted to update the second line, let's say I didn't pick two off the shelf, I couldn't find the two, maybe I could only find one. I can click on the shopping cart and change this picked from 2 to 1. There we go. Right? And so now at this stage, what will happen is, someone from your picking team, maybe a manager perhaps, they'll take your pick, confirm it with what's actually been packed, and they'll close out this wave. And you want to make sure things are final once you close it out, because you won't be able to unclose a wave. And what you can do is ship this order out. And so I've got this order selected here. And so if you want to adjust freight at this stage, because you'll get a good idea of how much the freight will be. So it's been estimated to be $15 at the sales order level, but you can click on this freight if you need to update it. So if you want to update the freight, so for example, let's say I want to update it to, let's say it's no longer 15, it's 25, we can do that. You can change it to free shipping as well. Now, if you wanted to add a tracking number, you can click on edit here on this carton that's been auto-created. And you can put in tracking information, right? So let's put in a tracking number. There we go. And here you can actually cartonize all your line items. So you can actually add cartons, basically do all kinds of things here. And this is more to do with the ShipStation integration, but for now, by default, it'll create simply one carton where you can put in a tracking number. And here you can adjust freight on the top right. So let's go ahead, let's save shipment. There we go. It's been saved. So you can see now the freight's been updated. And now we can simply hit ship. And there we go. You'll notice now that the invoice has been generated, which means that the financial transaction has actually been created, because the sales order actually doesn't have a financial transaction, but an invoice does. So that's an important thing of note, that an invoice will actually affect your accounts receivable. And of course, you can print off these packing slips and invoices. And if I go back to my sales order and refresh it, I'm going to see here this quantity ship column, the units that were actually invoiced. So 1 and 1. And I can actually see here, even from the reporting tab, if I go options, reporting, show linked invoices, this invoice that's got 2 lines that have been shipped out. So that's basically how you go through the fulfillment process. And this is largely what you want to do if you're self-fulfilling. Now, what we did essentially in summary was we created a wave. We created a wave for 1 and 2, but we noticed that the second line, we actually didn't have 2. We only had 1. So we actually picked 1, and that's why it's showing 1 here. So then we closed out the wave, and then we actually shipped the order out, which created the invoice, which generated that accounts receivable transaction, and mark these units as quantity shipped. And notice one more thing: the status on this order has gone from released to partially shipped. It's going to show actually shipped, just shipped without the partially, once all these quantity ships match the quantity on the sales order here. Now, another way that you can speed up things, you can go create wave auto, and instead of manually selecting line by line what you want to wave, you can do something like this. You can try to wave the entire order. So for example, if I were to do this, it's actually going to fail, because it's going to say, well, I tried to wave the last line as well, but because it was short, it didn't go through. Or you can allocate what's available. So it's just going to allocate whatever it can. So in this case, if we were to do this, you can say successful. And if we were to take a look now, notice how the quantity allocated column has now populated for all these lines that whatever it could allocate. So that's those are some of the ways that you can basically shortcut wave and shortcut allocate. right from the sales order center. From the sales order module. And from the sales order center, you have these features as well. So for example, I can basically select a whole bunch of orders here. Let's take a look at these released orders, and I can just right click, and I have that option to automatically waive all of them at once. Now the difference here between batch and individual, both options will create waives for all the selected orders. It's just that batch will create one wave, and in that one wave, it'll put these 3 orders. So waiving actually can become a little bit complex in that if your operation is more advanced and you want to be more efficient, you can actually create one wave and put a whole bunch of orders into it. Otherwise, you can choose the individual option, which will create 3 waves, 1 wave per order, right? So either way, it'll achieve the same thing. It'll allocate all 3 orders, but it's just a matter of how you want to do it. Do you want to do it in 3 waves? I say 3 because in this case, there's 3 orders selected, or do you want to do it all in one wave? And of course, in each one will be the 3 options that we saw from the sales order module, right? So, and the waiving manual option is basically how we did it before. One good thing of note I want to mention is the allocation percent preview, which essentially simulates creating a wave before actually creating one, without actually creating one, I should say. So what you can do is, let's say you have a whole bunch of orders, but you're not sure how to allocate the inventory for them, how to actually waive them. What you can do is just select them off, click on the percent preview, and you can say, hey, what would my orders look like if I were to waive them? So I can see here this last one, it's 50% allocatable, and the second one is only 17%, and the first one, I can't waive anything. There's no stock on it whatsoever. So, and you can dig in and see in much more detail what these look like. Now, if any of these orders you did want to go through with a waive, you can actually select them here, and you can go options, waive auto, and then you have all your normal features that you had from the center. All right, so this is the allocation percent preview. It's a great feature. It's a great way to kind of see in advance what you're trying to waive without actually creating the waive. Okay, so one thing I want to note is if you go and create a waive, there we go. So there, it's actually gone through with that. Let's actually create a waive on one more order. So that's essentially the workflow for creating a wave, picking it, printing out that pick ticket, letting your warehouse team pick the order, then closing the wave, and then shipping the order out with the tracking information. Now, if your warehouse, in this case your store, is connected to a 3PL, either through an API integration or a CSV integration, then it's a little bit different. Then there's basically less steps involved. Then essentially all you need to do is create a wave. In this case, let me pick an order that can actually create a wave on. There we go. So I'm going to go options. I'm going to go create wave auto and allocate what's available. There we go. So you can actually just create a wave if you have an API or CSV integration with that warehouse and the order belongs to that warehouse. All you need to do is simply just create the wave. You don't need to go through with the picking or close wave or ship process. The warehouse will actually do that for you. If they've got a CSV or API integration built in, they'll actually fetch those waves in automatically and basically process those waves and then ship the order out and then send the ship confirmation back to Xoro, which will automatically ship the order out in Xoro. So you'll see over time as your orders get shipped in Xoro, they'll get marked as shipped as your 3PL goes through those orders and actually ships them out. So just as a reminder, again, if you're self-fulfilling, you want to go through the entire workflow. You want to create the wave, pick it, and then close the wave, ship the order out with that tracking information. And the tracking information is optional. I mean, you can simply just choose to ship the order out. Whereas if you have a 3PL that's attached to your warehouse that's actually doing your fulfillment, and they're connected to Xoro either through CSV or API integration, and you can talk to your account manager more about how to get that set up. They'll be able to handle that for you. In that case, you simply just need to create the wave. That's it. And you probably noticed that when I was creating a wave, there was an option. I think it's disabled when I did it last time, but there is an option to create a locked wave. So what that does is, and actually, let me just do this for a second here. I'm actually going to go to reporting, and I'm going to go to show waves. So let me actually void the wave that's on this order. There we go. And let me create wave again. So here it's actually going to confirm for me. And it's going to say, okay, well, are you sure you want to create this wave? But it's also going to ask me, do I want to lock this wave? Now, what that simply means is if you have a CSV or API integration with this order, with your 3PL here, what you can do is you can choose to lock this wave. What that will do is that'll allocate the goods in advance, but it will not send the wave to the 3PL so that they can start processing it. So if you have some select customers that you want to pre-allocate the orders, but you don't want to start shipment yet, you can do this. You can basically create a wave, but just lock it. And then that'll leave the order as allocated. So it'll still allocate the orders as per usual. The only thing it won't do is it won't send the wave to the 3PL. And so the 3PL won't begin to start shipping yet. So then what you can actually do is, let's say we were to lock this wave, on OK. And then what you can do is you can go to the wave center, and we can find our wave here. For example, this was it right here, and you can see the lock status on this is yes. So you can actually just simply toggle the lock status. So let's say, a month from now, 2 months from now, it's been sitting there as allocated. The inventory is reserved for this order, but we didn't want to ship it until later on. So in that case, I can actually unlock it. See the lock status changed there, and I can do this in batch as well for many orders. And so what I'll do is I'll simply, I think you can't do it for voided orders, but that'll simply change the lock status here. And it'll basically, as soon as it's unlocked, it'll be available for the 3PL to start processing. So this is a great way to allocate in advance without actually sending the wave to your 3PL. Okay. So, and that's another kind of reminder is that when you actually ship the order out, the inventory, it's at that stage the inventory is actually depleted from the system. So it's not depleted when you add the units to a sales order and release it or any point. It's actually not depleted all the way until the invoice is generated, because it's at that point that the accounts receivable is actually generated, that transaction, that financial transaction. And at that point, the inventory is actually gone from the system. And another thing I want to mention is this availability column. So this availability column, it's looking at the net available inventory level, and we'll talk a little bit more about inventory levels in the purchasing training. But for now, just know that this is looking at net available. And so it's looking at your available inventory after any allocation. So let's say you have 100 units on your shelf. Let's say 30 of those units are allocated already. They're already waived on other orders. This will show available as 70. So it's already going to take into account those allocated orders for other customers. All right, so that looks good. Let's talk a little bit about, so now that we've gone through kind of this release and waiving stuff, let's go through taking a deposit. So let me close some of my tabs here and start with a new order. I'm going to open up our original order that we had. Okay, so what we're going to do is our original order, I had annotated a 25% advance payment here. So I have a couple things I can do to this order. If I have a payment gateway that's connected to Xoro, so Stripe or Moneris or something like that, excuse me, what I can do is I can click on options here, and I can click on take deposit, and I can send them a deposit link. So that'll send them an email, and it'll have a PDF attached of the order. It'll have all the other information, and they'll be able to click on a button, which will take them to, which will basically give them an option where they can actually make the payment themselves. So they'll be able to put in their card information. They'll be able to save their card information and actually be able to process the payment themselves. So this is really handy if if you want them to be able to process the payments. You don't really want to invest in that time. Instead, it's just easier to send out the links and let your customers actually process the payments. And it's a great way to actually have that happen. So once they actually process the payment in the gateway, two things will happen. Um, Eventually, those funds will show up in your bank account as part of a payout, as per your payment gateway. And the other thing is a deposit will actually be created in Xoro. So if I actually pull up the deposit column here, I can actually see what deposits have been taken on these orders. So that's this send deposit link, which you can actually do in batch. So you can actually select off multiple orders at once, and you can say take deposit, send deposit link. All right, so here we go. That's the send deposit link. Now, record deposit lets you yourself actually record the deposit on this order. So we're going to click on this. And so the nice thing here is it's going to pull up the deposit module for me automatically, and it's going to populate some things. It's going to populate the deposit amount with 25% in this case of the total order. And if I were to leave this blank, it would just pull in all the total amount. All right, and it's going to automatically link this order total to this amount, which is important. You can put in some reference numbers here, choose your accounts. Now, if you wanted to process the customer's card that you have on file, you can actually select Visa here, click on Process Card, and then fill in the information here, and then hit Confirm. So that's in essence the same as basically sending a link. It's just when you send a link, they do it, whereas if you do it like this, then you're doing it, right? So that's essentially the difference here. But if you did want to process their card through the payment gateway that's connected in Xoro directly within the app, you can do that as well, just by selecting this Process Card feature. If you're processing the card outside of Xoro, then simply just untick this, and it'll just be like any other payment that you're recording within Xoro. So let's go ahead and save. Click OK. There we go. There we go. The deposit's now been taken. If I refresh this, this deposit taken is now populated. Now, another thing of note is when you actually ship out the order and generate that invoice, the deposit, we can actually enable a setting for you that'll auto-apply the deposit to that invoice so that when the invoice is generated, it's already got that deposit applied to it. So you don't have to manually go in and apply it. Okay, let's talk about invoice credit memos and returns. So there's actually basically two types of returns that you can create within Xoro. So let's say you ship the order out, you generate the invoice, the customer came to you and wanted to return some of the goods. The first thing you can do is create an invoice credit memo. And what this module is for is it uses an existing invoice that's already in Xoro to create a return. So if there's no invoice in Xoro and you want to create a return or a credit, we'll talk about in a sec how to do that. But if there is an invoice and they're returning that inventory, this is what you want to do. So in this module, simply click on the search button here. You can select the customer that you're doing the return for, and let's put in the invoice number here. I'm going to click on select. And actually, I have no available to credit quantity here, so I'm going to select another invoice. Hopefully, there's some quantity I can use here. Perfect. Here there is. So what I did was essentially, it's going to fetch in those invoice lines for me. So all those lines that were shipped to the customer by default, automatically, it's just going to fetch them in here. And so here I can actually choose what's been returned. So let's say this second line was returned. And I can actually choose a return code here. So this is very important. You want to make sure that you select this accurately. So if it's a customer satisfaction return, click on OK here. You can add a return note and click on Add Quantity. And then you can choose the location that you want to return it to. So I'm going to click on this location here. And I'm going to say credit because that's how much, that's what we're doing here. And we're going to put one quantity. Close this. And I marked here that the return code was customer satisfaction. So let's say, that was maybe something was ripped or, the customer had the wrong size or something like that. And let's say we're returning the third line here as well. What I can actually do is I can change the return code for this one, and I can say maybe this one was damaged. And I can click on Add Quantity, and now what this will do is actually return it to a damaged location, which won't be part of sellable inventory. So when an item is on a damaged location, it won't be part of that normal available inventory that you can actually sell, that shows up as available on the sales order module. So that's an important note here, that if it is damaged, you want to make sure that you want to select DG as the damage code. So I'm going to again return credit one quantity, close this, and there we go. There we've got our two items now that we've added, so that we're at two items that we're actually taking back into inventory. In the first case, we're actually returning it as customer satisfaction, so it will go back as regular inventory. The second line will go back as inventory, but it'll be to a damaged location, so it won't be sellable inventory. Now here I can actually annotate a restocking fee. I can add a return note. I can add a memo. I want to make sure I select my date right. I can return shipping as well. So if there's any shipping charged to the invoice, I can return that as well here. And now what I can simply do is hit save and click OK. And there we've got our credit memo created. So you can use this credit memo. The customer can use it for future orders, for future invoices. They can apply it, or they can request a refund, and you can actually create a refund on the credit memo. So we'll talk about a little bit more in the other training how to handle that. But for now, the credit memo has been recorded. Now, I was talking earlier how this is in the case where they actually want to return inventory back into the system, and the invoice exists within Xoro. Let's say the invoice doesn't exist within Xoro. You can use the credit memo module instead of the invoice credit memo module to do basically the same thing. So here we can actually select a customer, and here we can select an item. So let's say, they return some inventory back, but the invoice for whatever reason doesn't exist in Xoro. Maybe, you just recently switched over to Xoro and the invoice existed in the old system. So in this case, you can actually return inventory back. Select the item here, select the return code, click on Add Item, and here we go. We can credit, let's say they return 2. So that's one way you can return inventory using the credit memo if the invoice never existed. Now, let's say you want to issue a credit to the customer without actually returning inventory. Let's say maybe you've asked them to keep the inventory, keep the units, but we'll just give you a credit. So in that case, you want to set up a service item, which your account manager can help you do. And you can add that service item here. So it's actually a non-inventory type item. I'm going to just use this service item here for now. And let's say it's for quantity 1, and let's say we gave them $150 worth of credit, and I can add this item. So now this credit memo is worth, the service item that we added plus the inventory that was returned. And again, you can add a memo, you can select even the rep, the date, and add a reference number, and so on. So here we click Save and OK, and there we go. We've got our credit memo saved. And so it's important to note that credit memos and invoice credit memos do create financial transactions because they do become a part of that the customer's account balance. And you can always access the credit memos from the credit memo center. Just like the sales order center, this center behaves very similarly to all the other centers in the system. All right. Now let's go to the customer info module. And so this is a great module that basically lets you summarize on one page all the information about a particular customer. So for instance, let's say I pull up a customer here. I can see basically the balance on the top right. I can see all the billing and shipping information here, their terms. If I scroll down, I can even see all their transactions, all the invoices, any sales receipts, any payments, any deposits, and so on, credits. And I can even filter out exactly what I want to see. So let's say I only want to see invoices. I can do that. Furthermore, I can do it for dates as well. So let's say I only want to see invoices from a particular date. I can do that, right? I don't know if there are any in this date, but there we go. We've got one. And I can even double click here and that'll open up the invoice and I can, edit it in a new window and so on if I wanted to further take an action on it. The orders and estimates tab, this shows all the orders and estimates basically for this customer. So again, I can double click on them, open them up. And again, there's filtering there as well. The communications tab basically lets you see all the correspondence with this customer. So basically all the emails that have been sent to this customer from anybody in the system, they'll show up here in this communications tab. All right. Now on the top right, you've got some options here. You can view the statement. So if you wanted to create a statement for this customer, you can actually do it like so. Print this statement out. And basically see a running balance and the statement for this customer. Of course, you can see a balance overview. So this is going to give a detailed report, basically whether this customer has, do they have overdue invoices, if they've exceeded their credit limit, if they're a customer defaulter, what their net balance is, and if they've got any pending invoices, if they're overdue, and of course any pending orders as well. The edit button will simply edit the customer. So you can, just like from the customer master, you can edit all their information, all their master information. Now, a really handy feature here is this balance. You can actually drill down and see how this balance was calculated. So you can see all invoices due, credits and deposits and totals. So, and even these itself, you can actually drill down. So for example, this invoice due, I can click on, and it's going to pull up the invoice center and automatically see how that 4536.43 came to be. And I can do the same for all the other totals. So I can do it for credits. It'll pull up the credit center, the deposits, right? And the total will actually pull up a report with a summarized balance. There we go. So this drill down, this balance drill down can be really handy that way. All right, let's take a look at some of the reports that can be handy for the sales team. So if I click on sales here, some of the most commonly used reports are sales by item summary, which summarizes by item basically how your units are, how basically your product has been selling, including gross margins, average prices, and so on. You can do a sales by sales rep report to see basically how your reps are performing and how they're doing in total. In all these reports, you can actually specify the from and to date, and then you can, simply preview it, which will reload it based on the new dates. And then, of course, all the reports you can export in PDF, Excel format. You can print them off as well. And of course, you've got sales order by delivery date. So this is a nice report that actually pulls in by date when certain items are being delivered. So you can actually see that, okay, on this date, I've got 9 units of this being shipped out. And if I click on this 9, I can actually see what order those 9 are coming from. And there's a profitability by brand report. So you want to see how particular brands are doing. You can do that as well. That'll pull them up in a COGS and sales format because it is a profitability report. And there's a commissions report as well. So the sales by sales rep detail report. So if you're not signed up to the commissions module, which You can actually create advanced rules. You can ask your account manager a little bit more about how that works. But basically, in that module, you can set up very advanced rules for your commissions. If you have a very complicated commission structure, you can create that in Xoro, create those rules in Xoro, and then run those reports monthly. And that'll calculate down to the cent, basically, all your commissions for all your reps. But if you use something a little bit more simpler, you can just use this report without having that add-on, and simply just take this report, which will show you all your transactions by rep, and simply export that to Excel or PDF, and then just do a percentage, 5%, 10%, 15, whatever percentage amount that you pay out for commissions. All right, that sounds good. So that covers the training to the sales portion of the training sessions here. Um, we'll see you again in the next. We'll speak in the next training session, and all the best with your Zoro Zoro needs.